Hello, how you guys doing? James here. Well, I decided to make a video, and this video is gonna be pretty interesting. It's a 14-minute long about these two gentlemen, and it talks about how to resegregate society. And I'll give my commentary when I get to the next video.
Freedom to learn to me means you determine what your course is in life as far as being exposed to facts.
I think parents of kids in public schools, we need to unite and we need to fight back.
At Green Mountain Coffee Roasters, we believe there's more goodness to be had. We select only premium quality beans, and our coffee is 100% responsibly sourced, all for a smooth and balanced cup. So, however you enjoy your coffee, we'll make
See,
sure
you got
every
slip.
cup
You
is packed with
can't
goodness.
like. Man, I hate doing this.
Okay. I would be interested, this is from DG, the initials DG, but many ask this question in this round of soliciting questions from our listeners. I would be interested in hearing more of you guys' perspective on the Scott Adams question, or more generally, the idea of white people avoiding, quote unquote, black people. I live in DC, in the DC area, and the penalties for everything from carjacking to subway fare evasion have been reduced in the name of, quote, racial equity. Not to mention changes in academic standards at many public schools, or even just the risk of being videotaped or called a Karen for all the world to see if an everyday argument about dogs or parking spots or whatever escalates. Given all of that, is it really irrational that some white people would want to live in a community where they don't have to fear such things? Most people are just trying to get through the day. What do you think about that, John?
That's a tough question to be asked, because if I were a white person, certainly my patience with the idea of root causes and what your responsibility is in terms of quote unquote doing the work would be severely tested by a situation like that. And I would imagine that if you lived in a neighborhood where it was white people who were behaving that way, who were making a ruckus and breaking the law and carjacking, etc., you'd still want to get out of there. It's not necessarily that you don't like black people. I'm not sure what we black people are saying about ourselves to imply that if you don't want to live in a dangerous neighborhood, you don't want to be around black people, as if it's inherent to blackness to be a dangerous person and that somehow white society deserves it or something like that. So, no, I can imagine what that impatience would be. I openly will say that I think you can be a very concerned, very enlightened white person, and yet decide that you don't want physically to be around that you don't want your children around that. I get it. I mean, even here in New York City, if there's somebody who's sleeping on the train, or often then waking up and demonstrating that they are not of sound mind, or they're addicted to something, neither of those things are their fault. But if that person is doing that, that person in New York City is usually black. And it's at the point where I am becoming reluctant to bring my girls onto the train, because I don't want them, not because of the danger of those guys, but because I don't want them to internalize the idea that there's something default about blackness and being in that condition and frankly creating a nuisance on the subway. I don't think that makes me a bigot, but I just don't want my children to form a certain picture. A white person might be concerned with things like that too. So yeah, I get it. Now Scott Adams clearly was being willfully obnoxious, but if we're talking about this issue of do you wish to be in a neighborhood like that? Yeah, I can understand wanting to get away, feeling guilty that you're white and the people who are bothering you are black, but you know, you have to live a life. In real life, we're all buying groceries. That's what real life is. So, yeah, I get it.
Yeah, I guess I distinguish between my common sense recognition that people are going to vote with their feet, and if they feel uncomfortable, they're going to move. You know, that's just the way of the world. I wouldn't have it any other way. I wouldn't have the government try to tell people where to live and where not to live, and so on. I want to distinguish between my acceptance of the fact that when the incentives are such and the environment is such that people feel uncomfortable, they're going to move. And the moral question that you put in about what are we obligated to do as decent citizens in terms of putting up with things that might be a little bit disquieting or uncomfortable in the interest of maintaining a kind of social solidarity or whatever. For example, people are committed, some, to sending their children to public schools and not to opting for private or parochial education for their kids, even though they could afford to do so because they want their kids to be a part of a educational milieu that has all walks of life represented, people from all different social classes and so on represented. They want their kids to know that not everybody was born with the advantages of middle class status that their family might enjoy, and so they in effect sacrifice a little something in terms of comfort on behalf of a commitment to kind of social solidarity. They want their kids to be exposed to stuff, that kind of thing. And I think there's something to that. I think racial integration of networks, of neighborhoods, of schools, other things equal, is to be sought after. Again, not by compulsion, but through a promotion of a norm or sort of ideal of good citizenship and notions of decent living. How do I live in society where there are inequalities and inequities and so on? And if I'm advantaged, maybe I shouldn't just run away and try to surround myself with other people who are advantaged. On the other hand, the litany of fear of crime, a concern about being treated with disrespect, a feeling that the anti-racism mantra has marginalized white people in certain ways and has encouraged black people to behave toward them in ways that are disquieting and uncomfortable. And a person's feeling, I don't have to put up with that. I can just move. I can move out from the city to the suburbs. I can move out from the coast to the vast middle of the country. I can move to Florida or Texas from California and find environments that are more congenial to myself. There's this guy, Bill Bishop is his name. He has a book called The Big Sort, S-O-R-T. Not to be confused with Michael Lewis's book on the financial crisis called The Big Short. The Big Sort. And he's basically saying that a lot of that is going on. A lot of relocation of people around the country moving to places where they find raising their children to be a less onerous and hazardous proposition. That's not only racial, but it's going to correlate with race because some of the places they're moving away from are going to have a large number of black people in them, and some of the stuff that they're running from is going to be, in many people's minds, associated with the African American population. So I think, to conclude, Scott Adams crudely and rudely gave voice to a phenomenon that I think we all have to take seriously. It's not just Marjorie Taylor Greene up there shouting about we need a national divorce between the red and the blue. It's a lot of people, decent people, honorable people, confronted with a dilemma and having to make their way in the world. And, each of us has to figure out how it is that we're going to make our way in the world. And, some of that involves choosing environments which are congenial. And people are going to do that. And I think that imposes a constraint on activists and advocates from Black Lives Matter on down to recognize that, there are benefits and there are costs. And if you take a posture that is so antagonistic that it gives people good reason to go for the exits, you have to reckon with, what the day after they've gone for the exits look like. If you're running a big city like Chicago, it's one thing to say crime is overblown. Tucker Carlson makes a big deal out of it every night, and he's beating a dead horse. And crime is not the bugaboo that the right wingers make it out to be. That could well be true. It's another thing to say, I don't give a damn what white people tell me because they're all racist anyway, and the murder in our city is not happening in their neighborhoods, it's happening in black neighborhoods, and please don't tell me, white person, about how it is that I have a responsibility to deal with crime in my city. You can say that if you want to. That's a invitation to the tax-paying, middle-class, family-based center of your city to head for the exits, and then you're going to have to deal with the consequences of that.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. There was a book about 20 years ago by Cheryl Cashin, and she's a black law professor. Last time
Is the book called
no, her other one. I think she has. There was one. I think it had integration in the title. If I broke the fourth wall more, I would look, because I have it on a shelf somewhere in here. But she wrote a book, and it was a very interesting book. It was a very disturbing book, but very interesting. I think she's at Georgetown, or she used to be. And her thesis was that middle-class black people should not try to move to posh, middle-class black communities, because as soon as a community like that is founded, poorer black people come along with them right next door anyway, and so you can't escape your poor black brethren. And that middle-class black people have a response.
Excuse me, John, I just want to mention the book is called The Failures of Integration.
That's it, right. And I recommend it, although I disagreed with almost every page. She was saying that middle-class black people should stay in poor black communities and help out to, avoid the process that William Julius Wilson demonstrated, which was that middle-class black people move out of communities after segregation and it leaves poor black people without role models. I've always been very skeptical of that argument, but it seems to have settled in as common wisdom. And the thing about Cheryl Cashin's book is that she actually said at one point, it's one of the most bizarre points I've ever seen made in a book. I'm surprised her editors didn't catch it, but I think she meant it. And it's kind of like what people mean when they say you should stay. And it could even be applied to white people too. She says there are worse things than being shot. She actually, with a straight face, she writes, you should stay. And I'm thinking, are there? I guess I don't think she's quite aware of the power of a gun. Maybe she thinks you just get a hurt leg or something. But she actually says there are worse things than being shot. The idea is that you should stay behind and suffer. That's what the dutiful citizen does. And her point is, don't try to get away because the poor people are going to come after you anyway. Weird argument, but I think that's where a lot of people feel that they're supposed to at least pay a kind of lip service to. That you're supposed to have a miserable life or deal with things like being shot as just, collateral damage because society isn't fair and you don't want to be part of the system. But that's a tough one to get across to people as they're buying their groceries and raising their kids. I think it's a little utopian to think that people are going to stay behind and deal with getting shot. It's tough.
Yeah, and I kind of agree with that, But when it comes down to that, everybody wants to have a decent life and good life. But there is a subconscious thing to this. And people really want to be around their own. And I'm going to show these 3 videos, and I'm going to tell you why. You ever notice that one of the old things, that even though that we still live in a modern era where people date and marry who you want, and it's the 20th, right? But for some people who are among the majority class, they don't want to be with other people, and America have always taught that. And so this is for the people who got that mindset. If being around black and other people trouble you, I got the solution for you. I got 3 videos I want to show you.
It's amazing. He's talking about motorcycle insurance, and people
Where you
love
can
it.
go. I made a video like this before.
He has a way of making you feel seen.
Have you ever wanted to know what the whitest cities in the United States are? If you said yes, today you're going to find out. 2 weeks ago, we did the whitest states in the U.S., followed a few days later by the blackest states, and I'm going to kind of give you the same intro as I did for those videos. Here it goes. A few months ago, I caved to public pressure. I usually avoid race-related videos, but I had so many requests for this one, I figured it was time to do it. People pointed out that it's not just racists that want to know the demographics of a location. People of different races want to know good places to live so they could kind of be amongst their own in some cases. The same type of festivals, maybe the same churches, same foods they're accustomed to. When that was explained to me that way, it made sense, and a few months ago I made the most Asian states followed by the most Hispanic states. Today we do the whitest cities in the US, and in a week or so we'll do the blackest cities. Now, there's some clarification I gotta give you. When I say white, I mean what the US Census considers only white. Yes, that is a category. There's other categories that include Hispanic whites, and that's usually things like Mexican Americans, Puerto Ricans, Cuban Americans, Brazilian Americans, people that are 2 or 3 generations in the United States. Their just heritage happens to come from Brazil, Mexico, Cuba, whatever. Got it? Get it? Good. Let's take a look. Number 10, Omaha, Nebraska. This shouldn't shock anyone at all. If you've ever been to Omaha, you kind of know. I mean, Omaha's in a state where you can get a hayride any time of the year. In the early days, the Omaha area was the home of the Pawnee and the Sioux Indians. And on July 21st, 1804, Lewis and Clark passed through this area and noted that the territory would be a good area to establish a trading post and possibly a fortified trading post. During the trek west, Mormons established the first non-native settlement in the region at what would become known as Cutler's Park. To give you an idea of the non-Hispanic white thing, if we were gauging that on this one and ranking it by that, they would be about 77% white with Hispanic. But the white only, Omaha, Nebraska is 66.8% white. Number 9, Fort Wayne, Indiana. Don't worry, this entire list just isn't Middle America. But Fort Wayne is definitely Middle America, and it is definitely white. The actual fort that was here, called Fort Wayne, was built in 1794 by the United States Army under the direction of American Revolutionary War General Anthony Wayne. So they decided to name the place after him. Years later, Fort Wayne became a main part of the Pennsylvania Railroad and soon became known as Altoona of the West. By the late 1800s, Fort Wayne had really started to grow, with the railroad dropping off European immigrants that were just pouring out of the East Coast. They're all looking for jobs. Back in the day, farms needed a lot of people. These days, 67.8% of the population of Fort Wayne, Indiana is white. Number 8, Colorado Springs, Colorado. Yeah, I could see this one. I'm not surprised about this one at all. Been years since I lived in Colorado Springs, but back 20 or so years ago, it was so white, the number 1 condiment was mild salsa. And it really doesn't look like much has changed. 68.7% of Colorado Springs population is considered white. Number 7, Gilbert, Arizona. Another one that's not a shocker. In my experience, just about any city in Arizona wouldn't be a shocker if they showed up on this list. Every time I've been to Gilbert, Arizona, I get the vibe that the number 1 concern in this city is getting a good seat at some early bird special restaurant. I like Gilbert though. Gilbert's a really nice Arizona town. I'm not a big desert person, but Gilbert's a nice place to live, and they got a really cool water tower in town. 69.7% of Gilbert, Arizona's residents are identified as white. Number 6, Portland, Oregon. I have to admit, I'm a little surprised at this one. I knew they'd be close. I didn't think Portland would make it into the top 10 for the whitest cities in the United States. Portland, Maine, 100%. But they're really not big enough. That's one thing I should have mentioned at the beginning. We are only including the top 100 most populated cities. So I'm sure you could find some little towns in Vermont that are rocking at 90%, but yeah, we're looking at bigger cities. If you know the history of Oregon, this probably won't surprise you because they've got kind of a racist past. I mean, they had things in their constitution on it only being a white state. That's true. Oregon began as a whites-only state through a series of black exclusionary laws that were designed to discourage black Americans from living here. I mean, in 1859, they put a thing in the Constitution that outlawed blacks from owning property. Now, that's the whole state of Oregon, and we're focusing on cities, but Portland is Oregon's largest city. Those things obviously have been taken out of Oregon's constitution, but that definitely slowed the migration of non-white people into Oregon. These days, about 70.5% of Portland, Oregon's population is identified as white. Number 5, Madison, Wisconsin. This one is not a surprise at all. I guess the only surprise for me as someone who's been here several times is they're not higher on the list. I was doing a video on Milwaukee, Wisconsin a few years back, and I came across one guy's video who he's an African American guy, and he said if you're moving to Wisconsin and you're black, you just go to Milwaukee. No place else. And he was joking. He's all, them's the rules. I thought that was pretty funny. But in the early days of settlers too, the Madison area, it was Germans, Dutch, Swiss, a lot of Irish, and Scandinavian immigrants. These days, 73.9% of Madison, Wisconsin's population is identified as white. Number 4, Lincoln, Nebraska. Yes, here we are with Nebraska again, and their big city of Lincoln. And when I say big city, I'm joking. Their population is under 300,000. Their whole metro area is only 342,000. So for Nebraska, that's a big city. For California, that's a town. Lincoln's a pretty interesting city that just kind of sprung up in the prairie. It's not near a major river. The Salt Creek runs through town, but it wasn't really close to the Platte River or the Missouri River. I mean, it's an hour drive from Lincoln to the Missouri River, but back in the day, that was a full day's travel. But Lincoln is definitely an interesting place, especially when you consider it's the state capital. If you look at the history of Nebraska, when it was the Nebraska Territory, Omaha was the capital then, and it probably should have stayed the capital when you consider the rivers and all that other good stuff. In the early 20th century, Volga German immigrants from Russia began showing up in this area, and that's when it started to really grow. These days, 80% of Lincoln, Nebraska's residents are considered white. Number 3, Scottsdale, Arizona. Again, not surprised. Scottsdale is just north of Gilbert, Arizona in the Phoenix metro area, and it shares a lot of the same features that Gilbert shares, including elderly people in knee socks, golf carts looking for a good early bird special. 80.3% of Scottsdale, Arizona's residents are identified as white. Number 2, Spokane, Washington. Now, whenever I do these videos, people always got to bring up race and stuff like that. Oh, look, there's no crime rate in these cities and they're white. We're going to hear all that stuff. It's going to be in the comment section below. It's ridiculous. But here's Spokane, Washington. They are extremely white and they have a very high crime rate. There's a reason the locals call this place Spokompton. The only thing Spokane, Washington and Compton, California have in common is a crime rate. Pretty high one. And no, Compton is not nearly as bad as it was in the 1990s. It still ain't good. If you don't know where Spokane is, it is on the eastern side of Washington State, not too far from the Idaho border. The first people to live in the area were the Spokane tribe, which the city is named after, obviously. In their language, that actually meant children of the sun. But they were living a good life here till explorers showed up and a fur trading outpost was set up, and Spokane grew out of that. These days, 81.4% of Spokane's residents are identified as white.
Amid global market volatility, stock market losses, and rising inflation.
So, yeah, I did a video on this one before, but let's go with this one.
Have you ever wondered what the whitest states in the U.S. are? Even though the United States is such a diverse country, there are still places where you may struggle to find even a single minority out of thousands of people. In this video, I'll break down the 5 whitest states in the U.S. These states have shown statistically that they are home to more white people per capita than any other state in the U.S. Let me know in the comments if your state has made the list. Starting out our list at number 5, we have Montana. Montana reportedly had a population of only 900,000 towards the end of 2022. You may be surprised to hear that over 85% of those 900,000 people are white. That means only 15% of the entire population is made up of minorities. Research shows that the number one reason for the lack of diversity in Montana is due primarily to the geographical location, located so far north. There is some definite correlation between colder climates and smaller populations of minority groups. Coming in at number 4 on the list, we have New Hampshire. New Hampshire had a population of around 1.3 million. Of those 1.3 million, over 89% of them are white. The small 11% left is made up of all other minorities, making New Hampshire one of the whitest states in the U.S. You may find yourself feeling out of place if you are a minority moving to New Hampshire, but there are small pockets around the state where you can find other minorities. It is thought that the primary reason for a lack of diversity in New Hampshire is the high cost of living, and some claim that most minorities find it difficult to justify a move to such an expensive state. At number 3 on the list, we have West Virginia. West Virginia had an estimated population of 1.8 million at the end of 2022. Of those 1.8 million people, a whopping 91% of them are white. For a state with such a big population, it's crazy to think that only 9% of them are made up of every other minority demographic. While West Virginia is a beautiful state, it's definitely not one of the most diverse in the country. That being said, these numbers are actually down a little from 2021, when West Virginia had an estimated 94% of people who were white living there. It is believed that the reason for lack of people of color in West Virginia is the cost of living and a somewhat poor reputation for being hospitable to minorities. Coming in at number 2 on the list is the state Vermont. Vermont is estimated to have had around 620,000 people living there at the end of 2022. Of those 620,000 people, over 92% of them are white. This means you could possibly go weeks without seeing a non-white person there unless you were really looking for them. This is one of the least diverse states in the entire country. There are places in Vermont like Rutland and Barrie which may actually not have a single person of color living there. You should keep this in mind if you are a person of color thinking about moving to Vermont. You will likely feel out of place unless you happen to find small groups of other minorities scattered throughout the state. Like other states on this list, the primary reasons for the lack of diversity seem to be a colder climate, higher cost of living, and a general non-hospitable environment for people of color. Given the previous 4 states, do you know what the whitest state in the U.S. is? Well, let me tell you. The number 1 whitest state in the U.S. is Maine. Maine was estimated to have a population of around 1.3 million at the end of 2022. Of those 1.3 million, a staggering 93% of them are white. For a state with a population in the millions, the fact that only 7% contain all other races is truly mind-boggling. Maine has one of the highest costs of living in the United States, and while typically up north, they are much more accommodating to people of color than in southern parts of the U.S., they simply do not have enough of them living there for it to matter too much. This concludes our list of the top 5 whitest states in the U.S. Do you live in one of these states, or are you thinking about moving to one of them? Let us know in the comments.
Now, why do that? Because you have a lot of different white supremacists and white nationalists be complaining about preserving the white race. Them cities and states, what can you ask for? So there are white people are going to be in majority of states. I don't understand what they mean by preserving the race, because as for white people, they're still the majority in them cities and them states, and that's why you get these skinheads, these nationalists, clans, and all these different groups of people. It's like, dude, you just go to any other state if you want to have all white families, and your kids won't come across another person of color. That's why, I wouldn't say that's why some people move out there, but I think a certain percentage of people probably move because of it. I do believe that in a certain way. But this guy, this is how he responds to this video. It's kind of this one guy called American Reacts.
When I could have decided to go.
The best comedies of the year are on Apple TV Plus.
You knew about this?
What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Guys, I checked out the 10 blackest states in the U.S. and now we have the 10 whitest states in the U.S. As I always say with these videos, this is not to, talk about race and, the differences. This is just really information, because, most of this stuff, when I did the 10 blackest states, most of them I figured, I was thinking Atlanta, Georgia, Louisiana, type things like that. Those places that I'm pretty sure is, I get them out. But with the whitest states, I'm thinking more up north. I know more up north. I live in Texas, so pretty good amount. Texas could be on here, but I don't know. Then again, just depends, because Texas is big, so the numbers, I feel like just like the other states with the blackest, the number was it was a good number just because the state, it's a smaller state. Some of them not as big as when it comes to Texas, California, maybe Florida, some of the biggest. It's hard to kind of get those numbers at the most, but I'm pretty sure it's gonna be more up north, maybe the North Dakota, South Dakotas, and all those different things, Idaho, things like that. This I know, I'm sure. Iowa. But let's check it out and see. Let me see if I'm right on some of these.
A few months ago, I finally caved to public pressure. Normally, I avoid race-related videos on this channel, but I kept getting requests. I always avoided the subject because I just didn't want the comment section to be ablaze with racist comments. People pointed out that it's not just races that want to know the demographics of a location. People of different races like to know where to live so they can be near types of restaurants they like, stores, and different festivals, things like that. To me, that argument made sense, so a few months back we did a video on the most Asian states in the US, and then later on we did the most Hispanic states. Today we are doing the whitest states. I mean, it's kind of only fair. We're going to look at the percentage of the population that is considered white. We'll also look at what European people settled in that area first, and this is all according to the US Census. And now, a brief overview. Around 1565, the Spanish showed up in St. Augustine, Florida. And of course, the Mayflower showed up on November 11th, 1620. Now, there's a whole bunch of other stories with explorers and Russians in Alaska and all that other good stuff, but the two main things in the history book of North American colonization is the Mayflower and the Spanish down in St. Augustine. Whatever the case may be, or the story may be, white people took over, and what is now the United States has been predominantly white since. Today we're going to look at 10 states whose percentages haven't changed much since the 1700s. Got it? Get it? Good. Let's take a look.
Let's see.
Number 10, Nebraska.
Okay.
Nebraska is extremely white. They start our list off by the 18th.
Why you had to say extremely? But no, I can see Nebraska. Yeah, I can see Nebraska. I never been there. I'm familiar. I know somebody that went to college there, actually from where I live, actually from my hometown. A guy played football there. This was like in maybe the 80s and stuff. But he played at the University of Nebraska, so that's pretty cool. Black guy.
Nebraska's European immigrant population was at its peak, and about 25% of the state's residents were born in a foreign country. Danes, Swedes, Irish, Germans, and Czechs figure prominently among the early newcomers to Nebraska. If you need more proof that Nebraska is extremely white, take this into consideration. The number one male name in Nebraska is Oliver, followed by Henry and Liam. Number 4 is Theodore. 88.1% of Nebraska's population is white.
Makes sense, but that's a large amount compared to when I did the blackest people. Like the numbers were like between like 20 and 40. We already in the 80s. Are we gonna hit 100%?
Number 9, Montana.
I figure more up north.
Blonde hair, blue eyes crowd, you have Montana. Originally, Italians and Germans settled in Fergus and Park counties. Many Germans came from North Dakota and Canada, and a lot of the cattlemen that landed in Montana were mostly English and Scottish. Now, the dynamic back then was the English and the Scottish basically worked the cattle, but the owners were typically German. Now, they did have sheepmen. Sheepmen normally weren't okay back in the day. The cattle guys didn't really like them. But there were a lot of them in Montana, and they were from the British Isles. That's how Montana became the Montana we know today. 88.9% of Montana's population is white. Number 8, Utah. If you didn't know Utah was mostly white, you've never been in a Mormon temple. Mormons make up about 70% of the Utah population, and they have a history of being so white they think Malcolm X is a member of the X-Men. In the early days, Spanish explorers and French Canadian...
Malcolm X was a member of the X-Men.
That's funny. The X-Men. In the early days, Spanish explorers and French Canadian, British, and Canadian fur traders had briefly stomped around Utah before 1847. But it was that year that the Mormon immigrants from Britain, Canada, Denmark, and Norway were part of the Mormon exodus from Illinois and became the first non-Native Americans to settle in the future Beehive State. 90.6% of Utah's population is considered white.
90.
Number 7, Iowa.
I figured.
You didn't know Iowa's...
I figured Iowa, I had some classmates, they went to school in Iowa. I had a kid I just trained, he just got back from Iowa, at the JUCO. Shout out to that JUCO in Iowa. forgot his name, but I know it's cold.
Very
it's
white.
cold.
You've never been to a county fair in Iowa. Before I start doing the research for this video, I honestly thought it was going to be number one. I've been to Iowa a few times, and it is probably the whitest state I've ever seen. At least that was my opinion. The numbers don't match up with my opinion. So here they are at number 7. Back in the early days, like the 1840s, a majority of the settlers that came to Iowa came from the Scandinavian countries. Some were Dutch, German, Irish, Scots, and Welsh. New Englanders started showing up that same time, along with Quakers in 1941, and then the Mormons started showing up around 1846. Yes, Iowa has a good-sized population of Mormons as well. Nothing near what Utah has, but it's up there. These days, 90.6% of Iowa's population is considered white. Number 6, Wyoming. There were 6 groups that made up the early immigrant settlers of Wyoming. British, the Germans, Italians, Basque, and the Greeks showed up here. In 1870, immigrants from the British Isles represented about 1/5 of Wyoming's territorial population.
I just realized another kid, he's actually from my hometown too. He actually just committed to play at the University of Wyoming. So that's pretty cool. I've never been to Wyoming. Like I said, I'm sure it's cold.
I never been to the States either.
And over 1/2 the foreign-born population. So the Brits came in strong. In the last few decades, Wyoming's become very popular with just about everyone. But these days, 92.5% of their population are identified as white. Number 5, Idaho. Idaho has quite the reputation for being very white.
I like Idaho potatoes.
That way. In the late 19th and early 20th century, a large majority of the settlers were English, many before statehood. This seemed like a really great place to them because there wasn't much government. Back in those days, most of the English from jolly old England were being taxed to death, and a place with next to no government seemed like a great place to live. 93% of Idaho's population is identified as white. Number 4, New Hampshire. This is another state that should be no surprise to anyone that's ever been to.
I don't know too much about New Hampshire to know. I didn't know
New Hampshire. If you live there, you already know. I mean, we're talking about a state where the people consider Taco Bell diversity. New Hampshire being part of New England obviously goes back to the colonial days. And at the time, it was mostly British residents in the area that would eventually become New Hampshire. But in 1799, they started being joined there by a lot of Scottish and Irish immigrants. What's strange is for a long time, they had a lot of French Canadians living in New Hampshire, and sometimes you could find little bits and pieces of that culture in New Hampshire. They came down for the textile mills from Quebec, and a lot of them stayed back in the day. These days, 93.1% of New Hampshire's population is considered white. Number 3, West Virginia. West Virginia's kind of strange. I thought they would be a little bit higher as in the percentage because unlike most cities in the United States, West Virginia cities really don't have a lot of diversity. And if you look outside the cities and some of the rural areas, the mountains and the hollers especially.
I've been to West Virginia.
I'm definitely familiar with the Mountaineers of West Virginia.
I've been to West Virginia.
Actually, there's like 0 diversity. So I'm actually a little surprised they're number 3 on this list. The settlement of present-day West Virginia began in the mid-1700s.
I'm in Ohio,
when
right next to the
Scottish,
state.
Irish, and German settlers from Pennsylvania came to the area that is now Berkeley and Greenbrier counties. The Scottish and Irish culture is really soaked into the West Virginia land. A lot of the folk music in this part of the country is heavy with Scottish and Irish folk influence. These days, 93.5% of West Virginia's population is identified as white. Number 2, Vermont. Remember everything I said about New Hampshire? Well, it's the same in Vermont. It always seems to be that way. I mean, they're right next to each other.
Yeah, I don't know too much about Vermont, but I can, like, maybe the smaller states
they always seem to show up really close on lists. You look at their crime stats, you look at their school grades, their economies, they're always right next to each other on whatever stat we're looking at. Like New Hampshire, the place was settled with the English, the Irish, and the Scottish eventually, and they also had a fair share of people coming down from Quebec, the French Canadians. These days, 94.2% of Vermont's population is identified as white. Alright, before we get to number 1, don't forget we have another channel called On This Day. There's a link down below. There's also a link for Home and Money, which if you're moving to another state, another city, they're a great website to help you get in touch with a realtor in that area you're moving to. Alright, on to number 1. And number one, Maine. Look at that. New England has 3 states on the top 4 on this list. And if you've ever been to New England, you probably are not surprised at all. And especially when it comes.
I'm just gonna show. It's a long. I'm not gonna show too much. Copyright fair use teaching purposes only. It's called The White Supremacy Gene by Binya Israel.
Encyclopedia Britannica, just to show you what Yam means. This is like the name that the Europeans were called back in the days. It's Yam. It says, also spelled Yam, ancient West Semitic deity who ruled the oceans, rivers, lakes, and underground springs. He goes on to say he also played an important role in the Baal myths recorded on the tablets uncovered in Ugarit, which said that at the beginning of time, Yam was awarded. Skip down to the bottom. According to some scholars, Yam was the same deity as Lotan, in Hebrew is Leviathan, who was represented as a hydra-like dragon or serpent. So Yam was, according to some scholars, is associated with Leviathan, a dragon or a serpent. Just an FYI. All right, fam. So the question is like, all right, so when did this lightning, the skin lightning in Europe occur? Because according to science, like this isn't something that's debatable, it's not in question, it's pretty well established in the scientific community. The only question is when. Like when did it happen? So if anyone's out there still arguing about Europe being white from the beginning, that's not supported by science today. Why? Because they mapped the human genome, they mapped the Neanderthal genome, and they're able to extract the genes from from those ancient remains, and they proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that white skin was not there first, that it was the dark skin population that was replaced by the light skin populations. Like I said, when did that happen? So, depending on which publication you read, some will say 7,000 years ago, kind of like this one. This one's interesting because specifically in England, there's this phenotype of dark skin, blue eyes, which is out of the scope of this presentation, but that is actually a specific Neanderthal trait. Dark skin, blue eyes is not the norm, but in England, that's one of the traits of a specific Neanderthal. But we will save that for another time. But the purpose of this, of me just showing you these articles, family, I want you just to see that it's been well established. It's known that this white complexion was something that arose, right? It came at a later date. It says how white skin evolved in Europeans. Pale complexions only spread in the region 8,000 years ago, study claim. And this one says 5,000 years, right? This was talking about direct evidence of positive selection of skin. Basically, this article is talking about how white skin came to be prevalent in Europe. And this is saying this was selection that changed from black to white. They call it selection. They call it positive selection. But that positive selection that happened in the last 5,000 years is what this one says. They even have charts. And it's interesting because when you look at the chart, like especially like the one in the middle, if you can see it, it curves up the closer you get to 3. Like that's the closer you get to the present day adaptation in the past 2,000 years. So just to show you, family, that, depending on which one you look at, they know that the change from black to white is relatively recent. It's a recent phenomenon. And this is, we're talking about Europe, right? So we're going to skip over this one. This one does have a pretty nice chart version. It shows present day on the right, and what you're looking at is a graph of skin color. So present day, let's say for instance, if you look at B, where it says northern or northwestern Europe, B, right? Skin, according to their scientific study, they're saying according to their scientific study, skin tone today is white on the right hand side. But as you move from right to left, and this is you're going back in time, you'll see that the average color of the population in Europe changed to black or to brown skin. And you can see that across the board, family. You can see Central Asia, East Asia. Only one that's a little weird is the Americans is just straight black. So, it is what it is, fam. Now, I will tell you that as you're doing your research, you have to pay attention to the dates, because early on, there were scientists out there that rejected it. So around 2012, you had this article from New Scientist saying, Europeans did not inherit pale skin from Neanderthals, right? But they could only say that for so long. Why? Well, because there were other research reports that were published after this that proved that was incorrect. And then after these other research reports came out, then it was pretty much settled. And actually, one of the guys that did a major discovery on this front, he actually won a Nobel Prize for it on skin color. So here we go, NBC News, it says, which parts of us are Neanderthal? Genes point to skin and hair. So one of the things you'll find, family, is that, people will tell you that, well, it's only 2%. When Europeans contracted Neanderthal DNA, it was only 2%. Well, that 2%, and they'll tell you that, well, and that 2% varies. That's correct to a certain degree. There's usually a base trait that's inherited. And then, aside from that base, you can't find random things aside from the base. The base things that's normally transmitted or transferred from Neanderthals is skin and hair genes, right? Mutations that are associated with skin and hair, those are the ones that are transferring over at a high frequency or high rate. The other things may change, but skin and hair are the things consistently transferred over from Neanderthal to human. And this one says, this is an NBC News report that says, a double-barrel comparison of ancient Neanderthal DNA with hundreds of modern-day genomes suggests that many of us have Neanderthal skin and hair traits. Uh-oh. All right, mothers, our Evas, don't get mad at me now. Because we're about to go someplace where you probably didn't expect us to go. Like we were talking about before, Neanderthal skin traits came over, and it was the trait for light skin. But there was also the trait for hair that came over as well. And let's keep reading, but we're not going to go too much into it on this one, but we'll dig into it a little bit. It says, but other parts of the Neanderthal genome appear to have been bred out of us along the way. The findings reported Wednesday by two separate teams of researchers in the journals Science and Nature follow up on the previous studies showing that Neanderthals interbred with humans outside of Africa, even though the Neanderthals went extinct about 30,000 years ago. Prime territory, right? This is what I was telling you about, fam. It says skin and hair. Both studies pinpoint parts of the genome that affect skin and hair characteristics as prime territory for snippets of Neanderthal DNA. In other words, fam, those are the primary ones that get transferred over. So this is just a map of where they believe that the interbreeding between modern humans and Neanderthals occurred. The part that you see in tan, which goes through Europe and through the Caucasus and into Asia, that is the territory where the Neanderthals lived. Right? That's the territory of Neanderthals. You can see where it says interbreeding with Neanderthals. Their guess is somewhere in Babylon, of all places. And then off to the left, you'll see where it says Europeans, and it says BNC2. So that's the gene that I was telling you about, family, that they are now tracking or tracing. That they're saying that this particular gene, this Neanderthal gene, is what Europeans contracted. And this is the gene that's mostly responsible for the white or pale skin. Here's just another view of the territory of the Neanderthals. You can see that it also includes what some would refer to as present-day Israel, right? Present-day Israel in the Middle All right, and so just another screenshot from an article where they actually list out some of the things that get transferred over, and you'll see hair color was one, eating disorders, and schizophrenia. Now we'll touch on this as well because one of the things that they identified early on that was transferred from Neanderthal over was behavior and mood. Behavior and mood, right? In addition to skin tone and hair and all that other stuff. So history will tell us, how behavior and mood from the Neanderthal impacted the Europeans, right? We can look at the history for that. But let me show you this this slide here, family. So this slide shows you all the locations where they found Neanderthals. Now this is pretty dated now. I don't think this is up to date, but wherever you see color circle, that is where they were able to extract Neanderthal DNA. And so you'll see that we have a whole bunch of Neanderthal sites over in Europe, France, some in Spain, Germany, Italy. But then if you move over to the right, you'll see one that's kind of in the middle. It says Messkaya. That is in the Caucasus Mountains. Now, let me play something for you real quick. This is from a professor, and he's going to describe, out of all these different Neanderthals, he's going to describe which one Europeans are most closest to as far as their DNA. The DNA of all those Neanderthals, and then compared it to the DNA of the modern day Europeans to see which one of these Neanderthals that the modern day Europeans are closest to and are related to. Let's see what he says. All right, stand by, family.
One of the most exciting things that we've learned about Neanderthals from their genetics is just how diverse they are. Neanderthals in Central Asia, for example, the very high-quality Neanderthal genome that's come from Denisova Cave, are different from Neanderthals in Europe. Those differences are almost as great as differences between any living human populations today. So the Neanderthals had within them, more than 50,000 years ago, a substantial store of variation.
All right, so what he's saying is that there's variation in the Neanderthals that they dug up, right? So basically, not all the Neanderthals look the same, right? Some Neanderthals were brown, some Neanderthals were white. But let's see which one he tells us that the Europeans are closest to.
And that store of variation, we don't yet know how it contributed to later human populations. It could be that we got most of our Neanderthal genetics from only one small part of the Neanderthal population. In fact, when we look at all the Neanderthals that we have DNA from, we find that we're most similar to a Neanderthal individual from Messkaya, which is a site in the Caucasus Mountains in Russia.
All right, so what he's saying, families, is that Europeans are closest to the Neanderthal that's within their DNA is closest to or closely matches the Neanderthal that's in the Caucasus Mountains. So this is just one of the things that pins Europeans to the Caucasus Mountains. There's more traits than just this one. I just want to point out that this is one of the traits that pins present-day Europeans to the Caucasus Mountains. So just to kind of take a quick pause here, I'm looking through the comments. So I see there's comments about Esau.
I'm gonna stop it right here, but I just want to it's a pretty long video. It's like another, and I don't want to get a copyright, but I just wanted to show you that it shows in the scientists that there's enough people that got that Neanderthal gene that you don't have to worry about breeding or mixing or anything like that, because wherever it traced back to. So that's basically what this video was about. But yeah, here's on Benny Israel, and it shows you how the way they transfer from one complexion to another complexion. And so I just, it was really interesting. And the reason why I showed that video, because you always hear some skin hair nationalists say we're trying to preserve the white race. So I said, hey, There is not. I mean, you don't have no problem. You still are the majority. So I don't understand why did they jump on racially attack or any other people when they still the majority in different cities and states. You know, in which this, and that's why I showed that. You know, we can get along if you, and if you want these people that don't feel comfortable around different groups of people because you feel subjectively they're gonna commit a lot of crime, and you don't want to be accused of being a Karen or a Ken and being accused of being racist. There's plenty of places in America where you don't have to see another black person. And these are the people who have this Karen mentality. You know, they just don't, you know, they're just irritable. And I mean, it's almost like, hey, if you feel that uncomfortable around black people and one of the people are black people, then that's one of the places I would go. And there's some places affordable. So, and these are people, because you got some people that subconsciously they're racist. And this is who I always address this to. Because, and that's what made them form all these skinheads and Klan. And it's just some people, they just don't like black people. So they say, okay, you got enough places in the United States to go. If you don't like black people, you don't have to, you can avoid them. But it was interesting with the first video. But the reason why I showed that, because there are some white people who feel that mixing out is going to lose your genetics and their genes. So that's why I point out that video. And some people say, wow, you know, but we're all people, we're all human. That's true, but there are some people that they fear that because someone who looks opposite and have an opposite gene and genetics override their genetics. And some people go real deep. So that's why they don't want to racially mix. See what I'm saying? That's the reason why, because they want that gene to keep going through. Even though, yeah, we're the genetics saying that we all go back to one Adam, but we live in a land that's still that been from century to century based on race. But these are people who, and I'm talking to, now I know everybody who is white or any other race don't see this, but this is I'm reaching to them. I'm talking to them, letting their insecure minds know. The people who don't have the problem with this don't apply to you. It's the people who do, and they do it subconsciously. So now this video is for them. So they don't have to feel subconsciously guilty of being white. And if they feel objectively traumatized by black people, then you got some place in earth in the place in the United States to go. You can avoid any other race or group of people. Then, and they're not, most of them they're not going to be the majority of them out there like the video said. So what's with the racial thing? I don't understand that. You still rule 80% of some states. It's not. You don't have to worry about if it's race mixing. You still the majority. It might be a 10 to 15% of race mixing, but you're still 90%, 89-90% white. So I don't understand when I see these people who are like these nationalists, these different people complain about preserving the white race. The white race is already 90% in this country. You know, just by these stats in these videos. That's why I showed these videos. So if somebody white say some stuff to you and they're white, show them the video. Say, what are you talking about? Because none of these other blacks and all these people are going to be around. If they believe that that crime or whatever, what they taught in the past, then maybe they believe in their own mind that crime ain't gonna be like it is. But they'll find out when somebody get on drugs or somebody got some dysfunction going on. They'll find out. It's about personality. But I just wanted to hear this video, but I just wanted to get some food for thought. There's no need to be racist when you're the majority of the race. There's no need to be a white nationalist or Klan when you're still majority. Who's gonna come out there? Who's gonna come out there in the city or state? So that's my opinion on this. But yeah, it don't need to threaten somebody, jump on a different group of people. The only thing you probably might have to contend with is someone's sexuality, or mostly, and if they're from a different religion, like the Jewish people. That's it. That's like a small percentage of people are Jewish, and they're basically white. And it's LGBT, which is basically majority of them gonna be basically white. So really, white people gotta deal with white people's issues when it comes to religion, because the majority of religion and its social orientation is white. All them cities and states I just showed you is majority white. So if there's someone LGBTQ and QI, they're white. If they whatever religion it is, Christianity, Judaism, they're white. So now what? Take away all the other races, what do you have? White. So if they feel comfortable around and looking at other people around, there you go. You don't have to be around no other race of people. You can just see them on TV. I don't know. But and that's why I said, if I felt that insecure about these black people and they acting crazy and whatever, man, I said, okay, let's do this. Let's get away from them. If it's about the race, you got a choice. Why? You say, why? Well, it's at least be honest with yourself. Be honest with your family. And ain't nobody going at this point. Nobody like what Scott did. That's why I said for people like Scott, that's fine. I used to live like, why? What? That's racist. No. I'm to the point. Maybe because some black people need to be around black people to do some internal healing, internal self-evaluation, and need to deal with each other. And that's the truth. And and maybe these other groups of people are being a distraction. And so maybe to break that slave mindset, because it's obviously it's from the past, and some people carrying it into the present. So maybe maybe that's the solution. Just for food for thought. And maybe people who feel like Scott. Now I know everybody don't have no problem with that, who's white. I know that. But these are people who do, and they subconsciously, it really bothers them. I'm talking about they see a black and they just go ape crap on TV. So it's like, okay, isolate yourself from society, and we're just people that look like you. And there's places in the world that you won't see a person look like me in the United States. And if they do, it's because the government, that's something between the government. Take that up with the government, because they send these folks from different places out there to blend in and so-called culturally wise. So hey, put that on your government. But with black folks, hey, you want to take that chance to go out there, and you don't want to be around your own people, but it ain't a guarantee that they don't want you out there either. Because they don't want their seed mixed in with your seed. And they still believe that. Just saying. There's some people who are like that, and they'll let you know. They'll let you know with their actions, and they'll just let you know. If they don't do, they don't. This is how you know when someone's prejudiced. Either you got the indirect prejudice, and they just come out and tell you, which I really don't deal with colored people. Then you got the the indirect prejudice. They don't say nothing to you. They don't make eye contact with you. They're prejudiced, and they wish you going about your business. And they just kind of make it like you don't need to be here. What you doing here? And when you an African American, Black American, you pick that up real quick. You know. So that's the clue right there. So anyway, I hope this video has been interesting, educating, informative. Sorry it was long, but I had to get the point across. And so hey, so now you know. And for the people who are hopefully don't take offense to it, but it is what it is. There's some people among the majority still feel like that way. So maybe you get away from them. Maybe the rest of us can work it out, get along. Something to think about. Alright then, I hope you enjoyed this video. Till next time, you guys take care, be blessed, and have a good day, and just get along with one another. Take care.